Hello and welcome to another ArtifactCCG.com video, and today we are going to be covering another mistakes you're going to make when you first start Artifact video. Today's topic is about deck building, and I'm cherry picking the data a little bit here, guys. I'm just using Artifact Fire, looking at a few random decks, and I'm going to talk about a common mistake, and perhaps the most common mistake people are going to make when they first start building Artifact decks, and that is having too high of a mana cost curve. A lot of this is going to stem from the fact that in Artifact, you get no mulligan, right? There's no retries here, and not only do you get no mulligan, but you have 3 potential lanes in which you can play cards on round 1. While it isn't necessarily that you play a card in every single lane, you have the option of doing so, so having a lower mana curve can actually help quite a lot, provided you don't run yourself out of cards, as you can afford to play a lot of cards very early on in the game, whereas having a high mana curve is twice as punishing because those low percentage chances where you get several of your high mana cost cards in your first hand are now going to happen a lot more in Artifact because you can't mulligan, right? Imagine a game like Hearthstone where you do get a mulligan, right? Even if you hit an opening hand of 4 or 6 cost cards or something, you can mulligan them away. And while you could still potentially draw a worse hand, you know, it's not, you have a little bit more leeway because mulligans make the worst percentage chance way lower percentage because it has to happen twice essentially. You can just get a complete retry at the odds. Little side note here, I felt like I should clarify this. If you assume full mulligans, and I'm doing that, where you take your entire hand and throw all of your hand away, I'm doing this because the math is easier this way. If you do full mulligans, right? Let's say that 10% of the time, when you just draw 5 cards or something, you have a terrible hand. If you have a single mulligan, the odds of you actually, after doing a full mulligan, having a terrible hand go from 1 in 10 games to 1 in 100 games, right? A single mulligan is a drastic change in percentage for these low chance bad hands. So if you take a look at a few of these random decks that I saw here, once again, these are kind of cherry picked, but let's count how many cards cost 6 or 7 mana here. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 cards that cost 6 or 7 mana. And that is just, in my opinion, way too high. Now, some decks can get away with this, and maybe this is a deck that can get away with it because it's blue-green, and blue's quite good at, or blue-black rather, and blue is quite good at stalling, and, you know, maybe you can come back with, like, Vestures of the Tyrant. So, if any deck can get away with high mana cost curves, it's blue decks, and it's going to be Vesture of the Tyrant decks because they can kind of stall the game out, even when they fall behind early. But if we take a look at an even worse example here, look at this deck, guys. Okay, so we have 3, 6, 8, 9, 12, 14, 17 6 or 7 cost cards in this deck. And sure, it's blue, so maybe that makes it a little bit more viable. But way too often, you're going to start the game with an almost entirely dead hand for multiple rounds of the game, right? And in Hearthstone, you could easily have, 6 or 7, 8 rounds in a game. Whereas in Artifact, you can get into the later rounds, but essentially every single round has 3 times as much gameplay. I mean, it doesn't exactly work out like that, but having cards early, or at least not having so many dead cards in your opening hand, is a really big deal. Once again, with no mulligan, if we take a look at this other site here that has this neat little odds calculator, if you have 40 cards, like that guy does, and 17 cards that are 6 or 7 mana, and you're drawing 5 cards, the odds of you starting with 4 of those 6 or 7 mana cards is actually 9%, right? So roughly 10% of your games, you're going to start out with 4 cards that are dead for at least the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 5th mana round, right? For the first 3 rounds, you're looking at 4 dead cards. It's really bad, okay? So this is something that I did a lot earlier on, is I'd run decks that had these high costed cards with really powerful effects, and sure, they'd do decent, but every once in a while I'd have this game where I just started the game with 3, let's say, Thunder God's Wraths, right? And I just have an almost entirely dead hand from the very beginning, and it lasted for the first 4 rounds, right? You're so far behind in card advantage at that point. It's really rough. And I complained about it. I was like, why don't we have a mulligan? But, you know, we're not getting a mulligan, guys. What you have to realize is that putting high-costed cards into your deck is going to risk a lot without a mulligan. Getting those dead hands is potentially just going to mean a lost game, right? Your opponent draws cards that are useful, kills several heroes, gets a gold advantage, comes into the next round. You draw 2 more cards, but maybe another one of them is dead, and you're still looking at, you know, 3 playable cards in your first, you know, 2 hands combined. It can be pretty rough. So please avoid that. So for example, if you take a look at this deck, sure, Sniper is a very tempting pick, right? But for me, I'd much rather run another blue hero that with a cheaper hero card, such as Kana, right? Kana brings in a 4-cost hero card, brings a lot of utility, makes it so you can play your blue cards more often, and doesn't clog up your deck with 3 more really expensive cards, so you can afford to fit more blue removal spells like Annihilation and, you know, the Eclipse and Thunder God's Wrath of Zeus. Just something to keep in mind. I think that when you first start building decks in Artifact, you're going to be used to these mana curves in other games where you can afford to have these unplayable early cards, and many of them, because if that, you know, 10% chance happens, you can just full mulligan, and now combined, you're looking at more like a 3 or 2% chance that you actually hit that, you know, 4 dead cards out of 5 hand. So something to avoid in this game. Please, guys, be careful. Don't have too high of a mana curve. Once again, not the most, you know, in-depth advice, but, you know, that's the point of this series. I'm giving you relatively simple advice, so when you get into Artifact, you don't hit all these simple stumbling blocks. You can just, from the beginning, begin learning the intricacies of the game, hopefully, and perform better, at least better than a lot of people have as they started the game, including myself. In any case, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe. If not, let us know why, and hopefully we can provide you better content in the future. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.